Religion is an interesting concept. From its birth, it has both created turmoil and despair, and relief and peace. The Crusades that we know today are for getting in the front line of a McDonald's for a McFlurry on a summer day. But before all this, Crusades were much, much more. There were so many and took on many different forms. When most people think of the Crusades, the image that springs to mind is the battle for Jerusalem or the kingdom of Acre in the Levant. Yet, during roughly the same period, a different kind of holy war raged far to the north in the dense forests and along the frigid coasts of the Baltic region. This conflict has been referred to as the Northern Crusades or the Baltic Crusades, and it pitted Christian knights, mainly Germanic and Scandinavian, against the last pockets of pagan peoples in Europe. Beginning in the late 12th century and extending well into the 14th century, the Northern Crusades had a far-reaching impact on the cultural, religious, and political map of northeastern Europe. Regions like Livonia, modern-day Latvia and Estonia, Prussia, and Lithuania became battlegrounds where knights of the Teutonic Order, the Livonian Brothers of the Sword, and other crusading contingents marched with the blessing of the papacy to convert or conquer the locals. From a strictly medieval viewpoint, these wars were about spreading Christianity and subduing heathen lands. In reality, motives included territorial expansion, economic gain, and securing trade routes along the Baltic Sea. Over centuries of campaigns, entire cultures were transformed, local pagan beliefs stamped out, and feudal societies erected. By exploring the evolution of these crusades, knights pitted against pagans in some of Europe's most hostile environments, we glimpse a chapter of the medieval world that is no less dramatic than the battles for the Holy Land. By the late 12th century, most of Europe had been Christianized, except for pockets in the far north and east. The Baltic region was home to diverse pagan tribes: Lets, Livs, Prussians, Curonians, Semi-Gallians, Lithuanians, and more. These communities often lived in clan-based or tribal structures, with local rulers but no overarching centralized state. Their religion involved polytheistic worship of nature deities, sacred groves, and ancestral spirits. They engaged in local trade, amber, furs, beeswax, and sporadic raiding or alliances. Simultaneously, German principalities near the Baltic coast saw opportunities in controlling these lands. Church leaders and princes wanted to end the pagan menace and extend their influence. The papacy, having sanctioned crusades in the Middle East, also encouraged campaigns in Europe to convert or forcibly subdue remaining pagans. This approach married religion with realpolitik. Popes granted indulgences to knights who joined such expeditions. Northern kingdoms like Denmark and Sweden also had interests. Denmark sought to control Estonian coasts and shipping lanes across the Baltic, while Sweden looked eastward, particularly at Finland. Christian kings claimed to bring the light of Christ to neighbors, but these ventures also served to expand royal influence and secure trade routes for their merchants. Hence, the stage was set. From around the 1190s onward, different crusading entities, German bishops, Teutonic Knights, Danish monarchs, Swedish kings, all sought papal approval and resources for holy wars against pagan tribes in Livonia, Prussia, and beyond. Though they frequently had conflicting agendas, they shared one overarching theme: Christian domination of the Baltic frontier. One of the earliest sustained campaigns occurred in Livonia, modern-day Latvia and southern Estonia. Bishop Albert of Buxhovden, appointed Bishop of Livonia in 1199, spearheaded an effort to Christianize the Livs and other local tribes. He founded the city of Riga in 1201 as a strategic base and port. To defend these early missionary outposts, Albert needed a military order. In 1202, Albert established the Livonian Brothers of the Sword, Fratres Militiae Christi, modeled loosely on the Knights Templar. These sword brothers pledged a monastic knightly lifestyle, devoting themselves to the crusade against pagans. Over the next 2 decades, they led harsh campaigns, forcibly converting or subjugating local tribes. Warfare tactics. The Sword Brothers built stone castles along major rivers. They forced local chieftains into feudal-like submission, demanding tribute and acceptance of Christian clergy. Pagan resistance. Tribes like the Semi-Gallians and Curonians sometimes rebelled, but the Crusaders' superior siege tactics and external reinforcements often proved decisive. Danish interference. Meanwhile, King Valdemar II of Denmark invaded northern Estonia, 1219, capturing Reval, Tallinn. This introduced a Danish foothold, creating friction with the Sword Brothers, who also eyed Estonian territory. By 1230, much of Livonia was nominally Christian. However, internal strife plagued the Sword Brothers. Poor discipline, controversies, and heavy losses in battles such as the Battle of Saul, 1236, where Lithuanian and Samogitian forces decimated them. In 1237, the remnants merged into the Teutonic Order under the new name Livonian Order, a branch of the same Teutonic Knights already active in Prussia. This reorganization allowed the Teutonic Knights to unify the Baltic Crusades under a more centralized and experienced command. From that point onward, Livonia was effectively governed by the Livonian Order, with bishops maintaining ecclesiastical rule, but relying on the knights for military might. Through these developments, the medieval map of northeastern Europe began to resemble a patchwork of crusader enclaves, bishoprics, and newly subjugated territories still bristling with tension. The conquest was brutal, but from the Crusaders' viewpoint, it was a necessary step to secure both faith and fortunes. The Teutonic Order, Ordo Teutonicus, originally formed in Acre in the Holy Land around the 1290s, aiming to protect German-speaking pilgrims. By the 1220s, it shifted focus to Europe after receiving appeals for help from dukes and bishops in the Baltic. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II and Pope Gregory IX granted them rights and privileges to carve out territory for the order in Prussia, an area inhabited by pagan Prussian tribes, not to be confused with later Protestant Prussia of the 18th century. Led by Grandmaster Hermann von Salza, the Teutonic Knights arrived in Kulm, Chelmno land, around 1226, courtesy of an invitation from Duke Conrad of Masovia, who hoped they'd help secure his border from Prussian raids. The Knights established fortifications and began a systematic campaign of conquest. Over the next few decades, they built a formidable network of castles, like Marienburg, eventually the Order's headquarters, and launched methodical raids, capturing swathes of Prussian territory. Forced conversions. Once subjugated, local leaders were compelled to accept Christianity. Pagan shrines were destroyed, replaced by churches. Resettlement. The Order often encouraged German settlers to colonize the conquered lands, creating new towns with German law and linking them into trade routes. Prussian resistance. Clans like the Sambans, Bardians, Nadrovians resisted fiercely. Several Prussian uprisings flared, most notably 1260 to 1274, leading to protracted guerrilla warfare. However, the Knights' castle-based strategy and reinforcements from across Europe eventually crushed these rebellions. By the late 13th century, the Teutonic Order had effectively Christianized and feudalized Prussia. The conquered region evolved into a semi-autonomous monastic state. As part of the Northern Crusades, this was arguably one of the most successful expansions for the Crusading orders, a permanent transformation of a pagan land into a Latin Christian stronghold. With secure ports along the Baltic, the Teutonic Knights emerged as powerful political players, rivals to Polish dukes, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and various Hanseatic cities. This corridor of knightly controlled territory would shape the geopolitics of northeastern Europe for centuries, laying roots for the complex interplay of Germanic influence in the region. In the process, local Prussian culture was heavily suppressed or assimilated. Their language and religious traditions gradually disappeared. Although nominally about faith, the conquest also brought agricultural development, trade links, and integration into broader European networks, albeit at the cost of local autonomy. While Livonia and Prussia were largely subdued by the mid-13th century, one major bulwark of paganism remained: the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Ruled by dynasties that skillfully balanced diplomacy and warfare, Lithuania became the last bastion of pagan Europe. From their capital region around Vilnius, the Lithuanian rulers had consolidated various Baltic tribes under their banner, forging a formidable state. They fought not only the Teutonic Knights in the west, but also rival principalities in Ruthenia to the east, with the Livonian Order controlling much of modern Latvia and Estonia, and the Teutonic Order holding Prussia. Lithuania was encircled. For decades, the Knights launched repeated raids, Reichsläufens, into Lithuanian lands, aiming to terrorize and wear down the pagan population. The fighting was extremely brutal. Both sides burned villages, took captives, and launched winter campaigns when rivers froze, allowing knights easier passage into the interior. Major battles. Key confrontations included frequent Teutonic assaults on Lithuanian strongholds, but decisive pitched battles were rarer. The conflict was often about raids, punitive expeditions, and fortress building. Lithuanian defense. Lithuanian dukes harnessed knowledge of local terrain, thick forests, and swampy areas to resist. They built wooden fortifications, used guerrilla tactics, and occasionally allied with Slavic powers to keep the knights at bay. Despite constant knightly pressure, Lithuania remained officially pagan until 1386, when Jogaila, Grand Duke of Lithuania, accepted Catholic baptism to marry Queen Jadwiga of Poland, creating the Polish-Lithuanian Union. This act, effectively merging Catholic Poland with pagan Lithuania, drastically shifted the power balance in the region. The Teutonic Knights had long justified their aggression by painting Lithuania as a pagan menace. Now, the Lithuanian monarchy embraced Christianity, undercutting the moral rationale behind the Crusades. Nevertheless, hostilities continued intermittently because the Teutonic Order questioned the sincerity of Lithuanian conversion, claiming large swathes of disputed frontier territory. Tensions would culminate in some of medieval Europe's largest battles, such as the Battle of Grunwald-Dotrost-Tannenberg in 1410, where the combined Polish-Lithuanian forces dealt the Knights a catastrophic defeat. This effectively ended the offensive ambitions of the crusading orders in the Baltic and signaled a new era of political realignment. While the Teutonic and Livonian orders dominated the southwestern and eastern Baltic, Denmark and Sweden also pursued expansions in neighboring lands. Danish-Estonian campaigns. After King Valdemar II's successful conquest of Reval, Tallinn, in 1219, Denmark claimed overlordship of northern Estonia. A legendary account says the Dannebrog, Danish flag, fell from the sky during a pivotal battle, inspiring Danish troops. They faced local resistance and friction with the Livonian Order over jurisdiction. Swedish Crusades. Sweden launched a series of crusades into Finland, often numbered as the First, Second, and Third Swedish Crusades, though contemporary evidence is scarce. The aim was to Christianize the Finns, and possibly other Finno-Ugric tribes, and block Novgorod's influence from the east. The exact chronology is debated, but these campaigns, culminating in the 13th century, helped integrate Finland into the Swedish realm. Though smaller in scale than the Teutonic campaigns, these northern forays shared a similar pattern, combined religious justification with territorial annexation. By the end of the Middle Ages, Finland had become a Swedish province, and Denmark maintained claims in Estonia until eventually selling or ceding them to the Livonian Order in subsequent centuries. Thus, the entire eastern Baltic seaboard fell under Christian monarchies or military orders, drastically altering the cultural linguistic landscape of the region. The Baltic region offered formidable challenges: dense coniferous forests, extensive marshlands, and brutal winters. Crusading knights, used to the milder climates of the Holy Roman Empire or France, found themselves trudging through snowdrifts or reliant on frozen rivers as roads. Campaigns often took place in winter precisely because the terrain became passable. Castles and forts sprang up as bases of operation, built from stone or local timber. Knightly cavalry charges were less effective on boggy ground or among thick woodlands, so the Crusaders adapted. Siege warfare and fortification building took precedence. Archery, crossbows, and even early gunpowder weapons, by the late 14th century, appeared sporadically. The local pagans used skirmish tactics, ambushes, and knowledge of hidden routes. Both sides engaged in hostage-taking, ransoms, and raids that targeted civilian populations. The line between soldier and civilian was often blurred. Once an area was pacified, clergy arrived to establish parishes, baptize en masse, and eradicate old shrines. Some pagan nobles accepted Christianity for political gain, hoping to preserve some authority by cooperating with the new overlords. Others fled deep into unconquered territories or launched rebellions. While forced baptisms are documented, a significant portion of the population likely converted for pragmatic reasons: tax breaks, avoidance of retribution, or new trade opportunities. Over time, Christian feasts, church tithes, and Latin liturgy replaced indigenous festivals and rituals, though echoes of folk paganism endured in rural customs. By the early 14th century, large-scale pagan frontiers had dwindled. The Teutonic Order controlled Prussia and parts of Livonia, while the Livonian Order dominated present-day Latvia and Estonia. Denmark, Sweden, and local bishops all held enclaves. Meanwhile, Lithuania remained half pagan until 1386, yet effectively integrated into Christian Europe after Jogaila embraced Catholicism. The impetus for crusading fervor waned as pagan enemies became Christian allies or were simply subdued. The Teutonic Order, now a major regional power, clashed with the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, especially over disputed Samogitiya. Initially, the Knights claimed these lands as pagan well after official Lithuanian conversion. Increasingly, however, Christian Europe viewed their continued aggression with suspicion. The Polish-Lithuanian Union also provided a formidable military counterweight. This rivalry crescendoed in 1410 at the Battle of Grunwald, Tannenberg, where the order suffered a catastrophic defeat, losing key knights and prestige. Although the order lingered into subsequent centuries, adopting new alliances and strategies, the rise of the Reformation in the 16th century, plus evolving national states, eroded its traditional monastic identity. Parts of the Baltic region, like Livonia, were pulled into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, while Sweden grew into a major power in the 17th century. Catholic crusading zeal gave way to more modern forms of statecraft, mercenary armies, and confessional conflicts, Protestant versus Catholic, overshadowing the older knightly orders. By the late medieval era, the Northern Crusades as a coherent phenomenon had ended. Their legacy, however, was profound. Entire regions forcibly Christianized, new states carved out, and the seeds planted for future cultural linguistic tensions across Prussia, the Baltic states, and beyond. The Baltic Crusades profoundly reshaped local cultures. Prussian extinction. The Old Prussian language and identity virtually disappeared by the 17th century, replaced by German-speaking populations under Teutonic rule. Livonian and other tribes, many smaller tribal groups were assimilated or saw their traditions diluted as German nobility and clergy established feudal structures. Livonian language and culture survived only in small pockets. Estonians and Latvians. They retained aspects of their identity but were heavily influenced by the German upper class, the so-called Baltic Germans, for centuries, embedding a feudal system that lasted into modern times. Lithuanian resilience. Lithuania, through union with Poland and eventual adoption of Christianity, maintained a distinct identity and became a significant European power, though the Lithuanian language faced challenges from Polonization and Germanic influences. Moreover, the creation of stone fortresses, Gothic churches, and Hanseatic trade cities like Riga, Tallinn, Danzig anchored the region to the broader European cultural and economic framework. Christianization involved monastic orders founding cathedrals and schools, accelerating literacy, albeit usually in Latin or German. In the process, local mythologies and pagan shrines were suppressed, leaving only fragments in folklore. The Northern Crusades circa 1180 to 1410 represent a multi-century tapestry of knights versus pagans, with complex motivations. Although couched in religious rhetoric and sanctioned by popes, these campaigns served secular ambitions for land, resources, and strategic coastline. The Knights, Livonian Brothers of the Sword, Teutonic Order, Danish Crusaders, Swedish kings, encountered peoples whose spiritual traditions they dismissed as idolatrous and backward. However, from the pagan perspective, these foreign invaders threatened ancestral homelands and freedoms. For a modern observer, labeling these holy wars invites scrutiny. Was it truly about Christian conversion or a convenient banner for conquest? The evidence suggests both. Missionaries and clergy accompanied the knights, building parishes and baptizing en masse. Yet these expansions also generated wealth for crusading orders, fueling castle construction and establishing feudal overlordship. In terms of historical impact, the Northern Crusades integrated the Baltic region into Latin Christendom, linking it more tightly with the economic and political currents of medieval Europe. Simultaneously, entire cultures, like the Prussians, disappeared, and others endured centuries of Germanic or Scandinavian dominion. Even Lithuania, eventually triumphant in forging a grand union with Poland, saw vast changes to its societal fabric upon embracing Catholicism. By the early 15th century, the once formidable monastic orders found themselves overshadowed by rising nation-states and shifting alliances. The defeat at Grunwald in 1410 signaled the end of crusading expansion in the north. Thus, if the battles for the Holy Land ended in 1291 with the fall of Acre, the final gasp of the Northern Crusades effectively occurred in the decades following Grunwald. Today, the legacy of knights versus pagans remains visible in old castle ruins, place names, and the layered identities of Baltic peoples. While overshadowed by the more famous Crusades in the Levant, these northern wars were arguably just as transformative, forging new frontiers between Christendom and the lands beyond.